decline of Rome was the natural and inevitable effect of immoderate greatness. The story of its ruin is simple and obvious. And instead of inquiring why the Roman Empire was destroyed, we should rather be surprised that it had subsisted so long. Edward Gibbon wrote those words in 1776. The same year a new nation declared its independence across the Atlantic, believing it would never repeat the mistakes of the old world. But history has a habit of rhyming. In the year 4076 AD, a boy sat on the throne of the most powerful empire the world had ever known. His name was Romulus Augustus. He was 14 years old, a child emperor, placed there not by merit or by blood, but by the machinations of his father, a general who had seized power through a military coup just 10 months earlier. The boy had no army loyal to him, no allies, no experience. He was, in every sense, a puppet, a figurehead dressed in purple, seated at the center of an empire that had already hollowed itself from within. And on that day in September, when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer marched into Ravenna with his soldiers, no one fought, no legions rallied to defend the throne, no senators rose to protest, no citizens flooded the streets. The last emperor of the Western Roman Empire was simply removed quietly, without ceremony, without resistance. Odoacer didn't even bother to kill him. He sent the boy to a villa in Campania, gave him a modest pension, and erased him from the record of power. History does not tell us what Romulus Augustus thought that day, whether he understood what had just ended, whether anyone around him grasped the magnitude of what had been lost. The most powerful civilization in human history, an empire that had endured for over 1,000 years, that had built roads still standing today, that had given the world its legal systems, its engineering, its very concept of republic, ended not with a war, not with a great battle, not with fire falling from the sky, but with silence, a silence that had been growing for centuries. Because Rome did not fall on that September day. That was simply the moment the body finally stopped moving. The soul of the empire had departed long before, eroded by forces far more dangerous than any barbarian army forces, that came not from beyond the borders, but from within the hearts and minds of its own people. The signs were everywhere for generations. They'd been visible to anyone willing to look. Historians wrote about them. Philosophers warned of them. Emperors themselves documented the decay in private journals never meant to be read by the public. And yet, almost no one listened. Because the most terrifying thing about the fall of a great civilization is not the fall itself. It is the fact that the people living through it rarely know it is happening. They go about their days, they attend the games, they argue about politics, they trust that the institutions will hold. They believe, because they need to believe, that the world they were born into is the world that will outlast them. Until one morning, they wake up, and everything they took for granted is gone. Those signs, the patterns that preceded Rome's collapse, have been studied, catalogued, and debated by historians for centuries. They are not mysterious. They are not hidden. In fact, they are disturbingly specific. And if you have the courage to look at them honestly, they look eerily like today.
In this video, we are going to do something that most history lessons never do. We are not going to talk about barbarian invasions. We are not going to list the names of emperors and the dates of battles. You can find that in any textbook, and none of it will explain why Rome actually fell. Because Rome was not murdered. Rome rotted. From the inside out, slowly, quietly, in ways that were almost invisible to the people living through it. And the patterns of that decay, the specific, documented, unmistakable patterns, are what we are going to trace in the next 40 minutes. Historians have spent centuries studying the fall of the Roman Empire. Not just what happened, but how it happened. How a civilization that powerful, that advanced, that seemingly permanent could collapse. And what they found is not a single catastrophe. It is not an earthquake, or a plague, or a single terrible emperor. What they found is a sequence, a pattern, a series of internal fractures that, taken together, form something like a blueprint for civilizational collapse. And that blueprint has 5 stages. The first is the erosion of trust in institutions. When the systems that held society together, the courts, the Senate, the military, stop serving the people and start serving themselves. When the laws still exist on paper, but everyone knows they no longer apply equally. When citizens begin to feel deep in their bones that the game is rigged. The second is the weaponization of distraction. When the state learns that a population kept entertained is a population kept quiet. When spectacle replaces substance. When the citizen stops asking difficult questions, not because the questions disappeared, but because he was given something easier to look at. The third is the collapse of the currency and the slow death of the middle class. When the money that once held its value is quietly debased. When the gap between those who have everything and those who have nothing becomes so wide that the people in the middle simply vanish. The fourth is the fracturing of a shared identity. When a society stops seeing itself as one people and splits into factions that hate each other more than they fear any external enemy. When the bonds that held millions of strangers together under a common purpose dissolve into tribal warfare, not on the battlefield, but in the streets, in the forums, in the hearts of ordinary citizens. And the fifth is the normalization of decay. When what was once considered shameful becomes tolerable. When standards that took generations to build are abandoned in a single decade. When the people who warn of decline are mocked, and the people who accelerated are celebrated. These 5 patterns did not happen overnight. They unfolded across generations. And at every stage, there were people who saw what was happening, who tried to sound the alarm. Most of them were ignored. But one of them was not just a philosopher or a historian. He was an emperor. He ruled Rome during what many scholars consider the beginning of its irreversible decline. A period of plague, war, betrayal, and institutional collapse happening simultaneously. His name was Marcus Aurelius. And every night, after the audiences and the battles, and the impossible decisions, he sat alone in his tent, and he wrote. He wrote not for publication, not for fame, not for posterity. He wrote for himself, a private journal of thoughts, reflections, and principles designed to keep one man sane, while the world around him was losing its mind. That journal survived. We know it today as the Meditations. And what it contains is not what you might expect from a man watching his empire crumble.
It is not despair. It is not denial. It is not rage. It is something far more powerful. But we will come to that. First, let us return to Rome at its height. Because to understand how something falls, you must first understand how high it stood, and why everyone believed it would stand forever.
To understand the fall of Rome, you must first stand inside it at its peak. You must feel what it was like to live in a civilization so vast, so powerful, so deeply embedded in the fabric of the known world, that the idea of its collapse would have seemed not just unlikely, but insane. In the year around 17 AD, under the Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire reached its greatest territorial extent. It stretched from the rain-soaked hills of northern Britain to the scorching deserts of Mesopotamia, from the Atlantic coast of Portugal to the Black Sea, from the Rhine and the Danube all the way down to the sands of North Africa. One empire, one legal system, one currency, one military governing an area of nearly 2 million square miles and over 60 million people, a quarter of the world's entire population at the time. The roads alone would have been enough to define a civilization. Over 50,000 miles of paved highways, engineered with such precision that many of them are still visible today, 2,000 years later. These roads connected every corner of the empire. A merchant in Jerusalem could send goods to a buyer in London, and the transaction would be protected by the same laws, conducted in the same currency, and secured by the same military force. The aqueducts carried fresh water across impossible distances, some spanning over 50 miles, feeding cities of 1 million people with clean water at a time. When the rest of the world drank from rivers, Roman engineers built structures that modern architects still study. The Pantheon's dome, poured from unreinforced concrete in 125 AD, remains the largest of its kind in the world. We have not surpassed it. Rome gave the Western world its legal tradition, the concept of innocent until proven guilty, the right to a trial, the distinction between public law and private law. These were not abstract ideas. They were practiced, enforced, and refined across centuries. Roman law became the foundation upon which virtually every modern legal system in Europe and the Americas was built. And then there was the currency. The Roman denarius was the reserve currency of the ancient world. It was accepted in markets from India to Scandinavia. Foreign kings held it in their treasuries. Its value was trusted, not because of the silver it contained, but because of the empire that stood behind it. To hold a denarius was to hold a piece of Rome's promise. And for centuries, that promise was unbreakable. The Romans called their city Urbs Aeternam, the eternal city, and they meant it. Not as poetry, but as fact. The empire had survived civil wars, plagues, famines, assassinations, and invasions. It had absorbed and outlasted every threat. The idea that Rome could fall, that one day its senate would be empty, its roads would crumble, its currency would be worthless, was simply beyond imagination. The Roman poet Virgil captured this belief in a single line from the Aeneid. spoken by Jupiter himself as a prophecy for the Roman people. I set no limits of time or achievement. I have given them empire without end. Empire without end. This was not arrogance. This was the lived experience of generation after generation of Romans who were born into greatness, grew old inside it, and died without ever seeing it waver. Their grandparents had lived under the empire. Their great-grandparents had lived under the empire. As far as anyone could remember, Rome had always been there. It was the water they swam in, the air they breathed, the only world they knew. And that was precisely the problem. Because when you have lived inside a great civilization for so long that you can no longer imagine its absence, you stop doing the things that made it great in the first place. The Roman historian Sallust saw this long before the final collapse. Writing in the 1st century BC, 400 years before the fall, he described what he saw happening to the Roman character when the state had grown powerful through toil and justice, when great kings had been vanquished in war, when wild tribes and mighty peoples had been subdued by force. Then fortune began to rage and throw everything into confusion. Those who had found it easy to bear hardship and danger found leisure and wealth, things desirable in themselves, a burden and a curse. And so first the love of money, and then the love of power grew upon them. These were the root of all evils, the love of money, and then the love of power. Sallust was not describing an invasion. He was not describing a natural disaster. He was describing something far more dangerous, a change in the internal character of a people, a slow, invisible shift from discipline to indulgence, from duty to entitlement, from sacrifice to self-interest. And it was this shift, not the barbarians, not the plagues, not the military defeats, that would ultimately bring the empire to its knees. But no one wanted to hear it, because the marble was still gleaming, the legions were still marching, the aqueducts were still flowing. Everything looked fine. And that is always how it begins. The first sign that a great civilization is dying is not visible from the outside. There are no cracks in the walls, no smoke on the horizon. The armies still march, the courts still convene, the ceremonies still take place on schedule. The first sign is something the citizens feel, long before they can name it. It is the slow, creeping realization that the institutions they were raised to trust no longer work for them. That the machinery of governance still moves, but it moves in its own interest. That the rules still exist, but they apply differently depending on who you are. In Rome, that machinery was the Senate. For centuries, the Roman Senate had been the beating heart of the Republic. It was where laws were debated, wars were authorized, and the future of the civilization was decided through deliberation, argument, and the collective judgment of its most experienced citizens. To be a senator was to carry the weight of Rome's future on your shoulders. It was the highest form of public service. But by the late Empire, the Senate had become something else entirely. Seats were no longer earned through public distinction. They were purchased,
Wealthy families bought their way in, provincial elites traded fortunes for titles. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus, writing in the 4th century, described a senate filled with men who cared more about the weight of their silk robes than the fate of their provinces. Men who spent their mornings being carried through the streets in gilded litters, surrounded by servants, and their evenings hosting banquets so extravagant that the menus alone required scribes to record them. The Senate still met. The votes were still counted. The speeches were still delivered with all the appropriate gravity and ceremony. But everyone knew the decisions had already been made elsewhere. Real power had shifted to the imperial court, a closed circle of advisors, generals, and bureaucrats who answered not to the people, but to whoever wore the purple. The Senate had become theater, a performance of governance, staged to create the illusion that the old system still functioned, while the real system operated behind closed doors. And the citizens knew it. They could feel it. But what could they do? The institutions still existed. The building still stood. The senator still spoke. It was easier to pretend the system worked than to confront the terrifying possibility that it didn't. The Roman historian Tacitus captured this with devastating precision, writing about the transition from republic to empire. He observed, the state had been revolutionized, and there was nothing left of the good old way of life. Stripped of equality, all looked up to the commands of a single man. But it was not only the Senate that hollowed out. The rot spread to every institution that Roman citizens depended on.
The military, once the pride of the Republic, composed of citizen soldiers who fought for their homeland, was gradually transformed into a mercenary force by the 4th and 5th centuries. The legions that defended Rome's borders were overwhelmingly composed of foreign recruits, Germanic tribesmen, Gothic cavalrymen, who had no connection to Roman culture, no loyalty to Roman ideals, and no stake in Roman survival beyond their next payment. Rome had outsourced its own defense to people who did not love it. And they did this not because they lacked Roman men willing to fight, but because Roman citizens had grown unwilling to serve the discipline, the sacrifice, the years of brutal campaigning. These were burdens that earlier generations had borne with pride. But a society that had grown comfortable, that had come to expect comfort as a right rather than a reward, no longer produced men eager to bleed for the common good. The Emperor Valentinian III, in the 5th century, issued desperate decrees trying to force Roman landowners to send men for military service. The landowners responded by hiding their workers, bribing officials, or simply ignoring the orders. The law existed. The enforcement did not. And then there was justice. Roman law, that extraordinary system that had once been the pride and the foundation of the civilization, developed a fracture that would prove fatal sometime during the 2nd and 3rd centuries. A formal legal distinction emerged between two classes of citizens: the honestiores, the wealthy, the well-connected, the holders of rank, and the humiliores, everyone else. The same crime, committed by two different men, now carried two different punishments. A wealthy citizen convicted of a serious offense might face exile or a fine. A common citizen convicted of the same offense faced hard labor, physical punishment, or
The law was no longer blind. It had learned to recognize wealth. And once the citizens understood this, once they internalized the reality that the system would protect some and punish others for the same transgression, something essential broke inside the social contract. Not loudly, not violently, but permanently. The Roman jurist Ulpian, who had once written that justice is the constant and perpetual will to render to each one his right, would not have recognized the system his successors had created. Justice had become a commodity, and like all commodities in a decaying empire, it went to the highest bidder. Now, let us pause here for a moment. What we have described so far, institutions that still function in appearance, but have been captured by private interests, a military that relies on those with no connection to the nation it defends, a legal system that applies different standards to different classes of people. These are not obscure historical footnotes. These are the first cracks in the foundation. And the Roman citizens who lived through this did not see it as a collapse. They saw it as normal, as the way things had always been. Because the change was so gradual, so incremental, that each generation inherited a slightly more broken version of the system, and assumed that was simply how the system worked. The philosopher Seneca warned of this very blindness centuries earlier. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. Life is long enough, and a sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements, if it were all well invested. He was speaking of individual lives, but the same truth applies to civilizations. Rome had been given enough time, enough power, enough wisdom to correct its course, and it chose not to. But the erosion of trust in institutions was only the first crack. What followed was something far more insidious, a deliberate strategy perfected by Rome's rulers to ensure the people never looked too closely at what was being taken from them.
In the 2nd century AD, the Roman poet Juvenal sat down and wrote a line that would survive 2,000 years. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was true. The people that once bestowed commands, consulships, legions, and all else, now concerns itself no more, and longs eagerly for just two things: bread and circuses, panem et circenses. It is perhaps the most famous diagnosis ever written about the death of a civilization. And what makes it so enduring is not just its elegance, but the fact that Juvenal was not describing a theory. He was describing what he saw with his own eyes every single day in the streets of Rome. Let us start with the bread. In the early republic, Rome fed itself. Its citizens were farmers, soldiers, tradesmen, men who worked the land and earned their grain through labor. The state did not provide food. It did not need to. The people were self-sufficient, and that self-sufficiency was considered a virtue. It was part of what it meant to be Roman. But as the empire expanded and wealth flooded in from conquered territories, something shifted. The small farmers who had once been the backbone of Roman society were pushed off their land by wealthy aristocrats who bought up vast estates, latifundia, and worked them with slave labor. Slaves were cheaper than free men, and so
The free men of Rome found themselves without land, without work, and without purpose. They migrated to the cities, especially to Rome itself. And the city swelled with hundreds of thousands of displaced citizens who had nothing to do and no way to feed themselves. The state's response was not to fix the problem. It was to manage it. Beginning in 123 BC, the Roman government introduced the grain dole, a program that provided free or heavily subsidized grain to the urban poor. What began as a temporary measure to prevent unrest became permanent. What began as a safety net became a way of life. By the 4th century AD, an estimated 1/3 of Rome's population depended entirely on state-distributed grain for their survival. And the emperors understood something crucial. A hungry population is a dangerous population, but a fed population, a population that receives just enough to survive without working, is a docile population, a dependent population, a population that will tolerate almost anything, as long as the grain keeps coming. But bread alone was not enough. The body could be fed. The mind needed something else. And so, the circuses.
The games of Rome did not begin as entertainment. They began as religious festivals, sacred rites held a few times a year to honor the gods. But over the centuries, they transformed into something entirely different. They became a state-sponsored industry of distraction, operating on a scale that the modern world would struggle to match. By the 4th century AD, the Roman calendar included 177 days of public games. 177, nearly half the year, was consumed by spectacle chariot races in the Circus Maximus, which could seat 250,000 people. Gladiatorial combat in the Colosseum, where men killed each other for the amusement of crowds that numbered in the tens of thousands. Mock naval battles staged in flooded arenas. Exotic animal hunts that slaughtered thousands of creatures imported from Africa and Asia. The scale was staggering during the inaugural games of the Colosseum in 80 AD. The Emperor Titus oversaw 100 consecutive days of spectacle. 9,000 animals were killed, thousands of gladiators fought, the entire city stopped functioning for over 3 months. And no one complained. No one demanded that the Senate address the growing problems at the borders, or the corruption in the courts, or the decay of the infrastructure. Because the games were not a distraction from the problems. They were a replacement for caring about them. The Emperor Trajan, considered one of Rome's greatest rulers, understood this mechanism perfectly. He reportedly said that the Roman populace was held in check by 2 things above all: the grain supply and the shows. Not the law, not the Senate, not civic duty or patriotic pride. Grain and shows. And this brings us to the third element that was crumbling beneath the surface. The one that would ultimately make both the bread and the circuses unsustainable. The money. The Roman denarius, the silver coin that had served as the foundation of the empire's economy for centuries, was, by the 3rd century, being systematically destroyed, not by foreign counterfeiters, not by market forces, but by the Roman government itself. The process was simple, and it was deliberate. Each successive emperor
facing mounting expenses, endless military campaigns, the cost of the grain dole, the expense of the games, the bribes needed to keep the army loyal, found that there was not enough silver in the treasury to pay for it all. And so they did what seemed like the easiest solution. They reduced the amount of silver in each coin and replaced it with cheaper metals.
Under Augustus, at the height of the empire, the denarius was nearly pure silver, roughly 95%. By the time of Marcus Aurelius, it had dropped to 75%. Under Septimius Severus, 50%. Under Gallienus, in the mid-3rd century, the silver content had fallen to just 5%. The coin that had once been trusted across the known world was now, in substance, a piece of copper with a thin wash of silver, a lie you could hold in your hand. The result was inevitable. Prices rose, not gradually. Explosively, inflation ravaged the empire. The cost of basic goods, wheat, oil, clothing, increased by as much as 1,000% in some regions during the 3rd century. The savings of ordinary families became worthless overnight. Merchants began refusing the debased coins entirely, demanding payment in goods or in older, purer currency. The Emperor Diocletian, in 301 AD, attempted to halt the collapse by issuing the Edict on Maximum Prices, a decree that set fixed prices for over 1,000 goods and services across the empire. The penalty for charging more than the set price was death. It did not work. Merchants simply stopped selling goods, vanished from the markets. A black economy emerged, one that operated entirely outside the government's control. The edict was quietly abandoned within a few years. And the citizens of Rome, the ones who had once held the most trusted currency in the world, found themselves in a situation that would have seemed impossible a generation earlier. Their money was worthless. Their savings were gone. The system they had trusted to protect their labor and their future had stolen both. Seneca, writing centuries before the worst of the debasement, had already identified the deeper danger. It is not that we have little time, but that we waste much of it. The same could be said of Rome's wealth. The empire did not run out of resources. It squandered them on spectacle, on dependence, on the slow, quiet fraud of a debased currency. And here is what made all of this so devastating. It was not any single one of these forces that destroyed Rome. It was the way they reinforced each other. The bread kept the people quiet. The circuses kept them distracted. The debased currency slowly stole their independence. And because they were quiet, distracted, and dependent, they did not resist. They could not resist, because to resist would mean confronting a truth that was simply too painful to accept, that the civilization they had been born into, the one they believed was eternal, was consuming itself. But even this was not the deepest wound. The hollowed institutions, the devalued money, the engineered distraction. These were symptoms. The disease was something else. Something that strikes at the very fabric of what holds a society together. And it is what Rome lost next. We've traced 2 of the 5 patterns that preceded Rome's collapse. The hollowing of its institutions, the engineering of distraction, and the destruction of its currency. So far, but there was a third force at work. One that was in many ways more destructive than either of those. Because institutions can be rebuilt, currencies can be reformed. But when a society loses the invisible bond that holds its people together, the shared sense of identity, of common purpose, of belonging to something larger than oneself, that loss is almost impossible to reverse. Rome did not just fracture economically or politically, it fractured spiritually. The people stopped seeing themselves as Romans and started seeing themselves as members of rival factions, each convinced that the other was the true enemy. And the most revealing example of this did not take place on a battlefield. It took place at the races. The chariot races in the Circus Maximus were, for centuries, one of the great unifying spectacles of Roman life. Citizens from every class, senators, soldiers, merchants, freed slaves, sat together in the stands and cheered for their favorite teams, identified by color: the blues, the greens, the reds, the whites. It was sport. It was entertainment. It was harmless. Until it wasn't. By the late Empire, particularly in the eastern capital of Constantinople, the chariot factions had transformed into something far more dangerous. The blues and the greens were no longer just racing teams. They had become political movements, social identities, armed camps. Each faction attracted different classes, different religious affiliations, different political allegiances. To be a blue or a green was not a matter of sporting preference. It was a declaration of who you were, who you stood with, and who you stood against. The colors became tribal markers, and the tribalism became violent. Street fights between blue and green supporters became routine. Entire neighborhoods were claimed by one faction. While the other businesses were burned, citizens were attacked for wearing the wrong color in the wrong part of the city. And then, in January of 532 AD, the tribalism exploded. The Nika riots, named after the word the rioters chanted, meaning conquer, began as a dispute at the races in Constantinople's hippodrome within hours. It had escalated into a full-scale insurrection. Blues and greens, united for once by their shared hatred of the emperor, Justinian's taxes and corrupt officials, tore through the city together. For 5 days, Constantinople burned. The rioters destroyed the cathedral of Hagia Sophia. They set fire to the Senate House. They burned entire districts to the ground. Tens of thousands of people died. Some in the fires, some in the violence, and finally, over 30,000 massacred in the hippodrome itself, when Justinian's generals sealed the exits and sent in the army to end the revolt by force. A civilization that had built aqueducts and legal codes and roads spanning 2 continents was tearing itself apart over colors. But the factions were only the surface. Beneath them was something deeper. A slow, generational erosion of the values that had built Rome in the first place. The Romans had a word for it: mos maiorum. It translates roughly as the way of the ancestors, an unwritten code of conduct that defined what it meant to be Roman. It was not a law. It was something stronger than law. It was a shared understanding passed from father to son, from generation to generation, that certain things mattered. Duty, discipline, frugality, self-sacrifice for the common good, integrity in public life, respect for one's word. The mos maiorum was never formally abolished. No emperor issued a decree canceling it. No senator gave a speech declaring it obsolete. It simply faded, slowly, quietly, one compromise at a time, one exception at a time, one generation at a time. Luxury replaced frugality. Self-interest replaced duty. Spectacle replaced substance. The Roman statesman Cato the Elder had warned about this centuries before the final collapse, raging against the growing influence of Greek luxury and the softening of Roman discipline. He was called old-fashioned. He was called out of touch. He was mocked by the very people who would later prove him right. And here we arrive at the fifth and most insidious pattern of all, the normalization of decay. It works like this. What was once considered shameful becomes tolerable. It's not ideal, people say, but it's not that bad. What was tolerable becomes acceptable. This is just how things are now. What was acceptable becomes expected. It's always been this way. And what was expected becomes celebrated. Those who embody the decay are elevated. Those who resisted are ridiculed. And those who try to sound the alarm are dismissed as nostalgic fools who cannot accept the march of progress. The British soldier and historian Sir John Glubb spent his career studying this exact pattern. In his 1978 essay, The Fate of Empires, he analyzed the life cycles of 11 great civilizations, from Assyria to the British Empire, and found a remarkably consistent sequence. Every empire, Glubb observed, passes through the same stages. The age of pioneers built on courage and self-sacrifice. The age of commerce fueled by ambition and enterprise. The age of affluence where wealth begins to replace purpose. The age of intellect, where knowledge is abundant, but wisdom is scarce. And finally, the age of decadence. Describe the characteristics of this final stage with clinical precision. An undisciplined, overextended military, conspicuous displays of wealth, a massive disparity between rich and poor, a desire to live off a bloated state, an obsession with sex, a debasement of the currency, and an increasing frivolity among the people. He wrote this in 1978. He was describing empires that fell centuries ago. But when you read those words today, now, across the centuries, the erosion of institutional trust, the weaponization of distraction, the destruction of the currency, the fracturing of shared identity, and the normalization of decay. We have seen them unfold inside Rome. We have watched them reinforce each other, feed each other, accelerate each other, until the civilization that once seemed invincible was hollowed from within. And if you have been listening carefully, truly carefully, you may have noticed something that I have deliberately left unspoken throughout this video.
These patterns do not only describe Rome. I am not going to tell you what they also describe. I do not need to. Because you already know. You have known since the second minute of this video. You have felt it in your chest with each new parallel, each new detail, each new echo of something familiar. And that feeling, that quiet, unsettling recognition, is precisely the feeling that the citizens of Rome never allowed themselves to fully confront. The question is whether we will make the same choice. But before we answer that, there is one more thing we need to see. Because in the middle of all this decay, during a very period when Rome's collapse was accelerating beyond repair, one man sat alone in a military tent on the frozen banks of the Danube and wrote something extraordinary. The year is 17 AD. The Antonine plague, believed to have been smallpox, has been sweeping through the empire for 5 years. It arrived with the soldiers returning from campaigns in the east, and it spread with terrifying speed along the very roads and trade routes that Rome had built to connect its vast territories.
Now,
we have followed these 5 patterns. The empire's own infrastructure became the vehicle of its suffering. Estimates vary, but historians believe that between 5 and 10 million people died at its peak. The plague was killing 2,000 people a day in the city of Rome alone. Entire villages were emptied, military units were decimated. The labor force that sustained the economy was ravaged, tax revenues collapsed. The price of grain soared beyond what ordinary families could afford. And the plague was only one of the crises. On the northern frontier, Germanic tribes, the Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Sarmatians, had sensed Rome's weakness and launched a coordinated invasion across the Danube. For the first time in centuries, barbarian armies penetrated deep into Roman territory, reaching as far as northern Italy. Cities that had never seen war were suddenly under siege. In the east, the Parthian Empire was pressing its advantage, threatening Rome's most valuable provinces. Inside the court, betrayal was constant. Generals schemed for power, advisors played factions against each other. The Senate, that hollow institution we described earlier, offered speeches, but no solutions.
Marcus Aurelius. He was not a warrior by nature. He was not raised to fight. He was, by temperament and training, a philosopher. A man who had spent his youth studying Epictetus and Plato and the Greek Stoics. A man who had been drawn to the life of contemplation, of books, of quiet thought. But fate, or fortune, or the gods, or the blind machinery of history had placed this philosopher on the throne of an empire that was falling apart. And so he did what no one expected. He went to the front. For the last 13 years of his life, Marcus Aurelius lived not in the palaces of Rome, but in military camps along the frozen banks of the Danube. He commanded legions. He negotiated with barbarian chieftains. He made decisions that determined whether cities stood or fell, whether thousands lived or died. He buried friends, he buried children. At least 4 of his sons and daughters died during his reign. He carried all of this every day for 13 years. And every night, When the tent flaps were closed and the camp fell quiet, he wrote. He did not write for an audience. He did not write for publication. He did not write to be remembered. The journal he kept, the one we now call the Meditations, was never intended to be read by anyone other than himself. It was a private conversation between a man and his own mind. And what he wrote was not what you might expect from a man whose world was collapsing. There is no self-pity in the Meditations. There is no rage. There is no denial. There is no fantasy of escape, no longing for a different life, no curse thrown at the gods for the unfairness of his burden. Instead, there is clarity. A brutal, luminous clarity about the nature of human existence, about what we can control, what we cannot, and why confusing the two is the source of almost all suffering. He wrote, "You have power over your mind. Not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And in the middle of all of this sat one man.
Think about that sentence. Consider the man who wrote it. An emperor surrounded by plague, war, betrayal, and the visible decay of everything his predecessors had built. A man who had every reason to despair, who had every reason to rage. And instead, he sat in the cold and wrote that the only power that matters is the power over your own mind.
The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. He wrote this from a man who governed the majority, who saw firsthand how crowds could be manipulated, how fear could be weaponized, how entire populations could descend into something resembling collective madness. He had read the historians. He had studied the philosophers. But more than that, he had lived it. He was living it every single day. And his conclusion was not to fix the crowd. It was to refuse to join it. He wrote, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." This was written by a man who knew that 2,000 people had died of plague in his city the day before. A man who knew that soldiers under his command were dying on a frozen river hundreds of miles from home. A man who had buried his own children. And yet, he chose gratitude, not as naivety, not as denial, but as a discipline, a deliberate act of the mind, practiced every morning in defiance of every reason to surrender to darkness. He wrote, "Soon you will have forgotten everything, and soon everything will have forgotten you." This is perhaps the most unsettling line in the Meditations. An emperor, the most powerful man in the known world, reminding himself that he too would be forgotten, that the empire he fought to hold together would one day be dust, that nothing he did, no matter how consequential, would survive the vast indifference of time. And yet, he did not stop. He did not retreat to a villa and wait for the end. He did not surrender to cynicism or apathy. He kept going. He kept governing. He kept fighting. He kept writing. Because Marcus Aurelius understood something that most people, in any age, never grasp.
The fall of an empire does not have to mean the fall of the individual.
Civilization would rise and civilization would fall. That is the rhythm of history. It cannot be stopped. It could not be stopped by Rome, and it will not be stopped by anyone who comes after. But within that rhythm, inside the chaos, inside the collapse, inside the long, slow unwinding of everything that once seemed permanent, there exists a space, a small, quiet, unassailable space. The space inside your own mind, the space where you choose who you are, regardless of what the world is becoming. Marcus Aurelius did not save Rome. History is clear on that. The decline continued, the fractures deepened. Within a century of his death, the empire would split in two, and the western half would begin its final slide toward the moment we described at the beginning of this video. A boy on a throne, removed without resistance, while no one fought. But Marcus Aurelius saved something that outlasted every legion, every road, every aqueduct, every monument that Rome ever built. He saved the proof that a human being, placed in impossible circumstances, surrounded by decay and madness and suffering, can choose to remain whole. And he left that proof in a journal that was never meant to be found. Let us take a step back now and look at where we have been. We began with a boy on a throne, 14 years old, the last emperor of Rome, removed without a fight, sent to a villa with a pension, and erased from history. An empire of 1,000 years, ending in silence. We trace the patterns that led to that silence. 5 patterns, 5 fractures, each one invisible on its own. Easy to dismiss, easy to explain away, easy to tolerate. But together, they form something that no army, no reform, no emperor could reverse. The institutions that stopped serving the people and started serving themselves. The bread in the circuses that kept the population fed and numb and compliant. The currency that was slowly, deliberately hollowed from within. A lie stamped in silver. The factions that turned citizens against each other, with more fury than they ever turned against a foreign enemy. And the quiet, generational normalization of decay. The slow acceptance that this is just how things are now. Rome did not fall. Because it was conquered, Rome fell. Because it forgot what had made it worth defending. One man remembered. Marcus Aurelius could not stop the decline. He knew that the Meditations contain no grand plans for saving the empire. No political manifestos, no strategies for reversing the rot. He understood, perhaps better than any ruler before or since, that some forces are beyond the reach of any individual, no matter how powerful. But he also understood something else, something that changes everything for anyone willing to hear it. He understood that there are 3 things that remain within your power, even when everything outside your power is collapsing. The first is how you think. Marcus wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." And in the middle of that forgetting, This is not motivational rhetoric coming from Marcus Aurelius. It is a battle-tested principle forged in the worst conditions imaginable. He was surrounded by corruption, by advisors who lied, by senators who schemed, by a public that wanted spectacle more than truth. And every day, the temptation existed to become like them, to play the game, to compromise, to justify small betrayals in the name of larger goals. He refused. Not because he was naive, not because he didn't understand the world, but because he understood that the moment you begin to argue about what integrity means, the moment you start negotiating with your own principles, you have already lost the only battle that matters. In a decaying civilization, the pressure to lower your standards is constant. Everyone around you is doing it. The institutions reward it, the culture celebrates it, and the voice inside your head whispers that you are a fool for holding the line. Marcus Aurelius heard that voice, and every night he sat down and wrote the opposite. The second thing that remains within your power is how you spend your attention. Marcus wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Therefore, guard accordingly, and take care that you entertain no notions unsuitable to virtue and reasonable nature." Guard your thoughts. In the 2nd century AD, the threats to a man's attention were chariots and games and political gossip today. The machinery of distraction is infinitely more sophisticated, but the principle is the same. When a civilization enters its period of decline, the noise becomes deafening, the spectacles multiply, the outrages multiply, the factions demand your allegiance, the media demand your emotion. Everything around you is designed to capture your attention and direct it toward things that serve someone else's interest, never your own. Marcus understood that attention is not a passive thing. It is the most valuable resource you possess. And in a world engineered to steal it from you, the deliberate act of choosing where you place your focus is an act of rebellion. The bread and circuses only work on those who accept them. The man who guards his mind, who chooses what he reads, what he watches, what he allows into his thoughts, is the one man the system cannot control. And the third thing that remains within your power is how you face what cannot be changed. Marcus wrote, "Look back over the past, with its changing empires that rose and fell, and you can foresee the future too. Empires fall. They always have. They always will. This is not pessimism. This is the rhythm of history. As predictable as the seasons, as unavoidable as age." They clung to the belief that their empire was different, that it was exempt from the cycle, that the eternal city would be eternal in fact, not just in name. The citizens of Rome could not accept this truth, and because they could not accept the truth, they could not prepare for it. They could not adapt. They could not protect what mattered most. Marcus Aurelius did not share their delusion. He wrote, with devastating honesty, "Soon you will have forgotten everything, and soon everything will have forgotten you." He knew that Rome, his Rome, the Rome he bled for, would not last. And he made peace with that. Not by giving up, not by retreating, but by focusing all of his remaining energy on the one thing no empire, no plague, no collapse could ever take from him: his character. The way he showed up each morning, the way he treated the people around him, the way he carried his suffering without allowing it to deform him, the way he governed not for glory but for duty, even when duty meant spending his final years in a frozen military camp, far from home, knowing that everything he was fighting for would eventually be undone. This was not optimism. This was something far rarer. This was a man who looked at the truth, all of it, without flinching, and decided to live well anyway. That is what Marcus Aurelius knew. And that is what he left for us. Romulus Augustus was 14 years old when the empire ended. He was given a pension. He was sent to a villa on the coast of Campania, a quiet place, with a view of the sea. History does not record how long he lived there. It does not record whether he married, or had children, or ever spoke about what had happened. It does not record whether he understood that he had been the last page of a story that had taken 1,000 years to write. He simply disappeared. And for a long time, no one noticed. The market still opened the next morning. The roads still carried travelers. The sun still rose over the ruins of what had once been the greatest civilization the world had ever known. Life went on, quieter, smaller, diminished. But it went on. Because that is how empires end, not with a moment that everyone recognizes, but with a long, slow silence that settles over a people who stop paying attention, long before the final page was turned. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is pay attention. If this reflection meant something to you, the next video explores the Stoic principles that have helped millions find strength in times of chaos. I will leave the link here.